On August the 16th, 1977, Elvis Presley died, and rock and roll music had lost its king. It was a sad reality that Elvis's contributions to music and pop culture were now no more. Indeed, a true icon and legend had left the building. Jump 13 years later and Home Alone was released, a fun family comedy about a young boy called Kevin McAllister, who accidentally gets left behind when his family heads out on a trip to Paris, where Kevin initially loves his freedom, but he must also protect his house from local burglars, the Wet Bandits. As throughout the film, he goes on a journey to actually really appreciate his family, where being reunited with them becomes his Christmas wish. Now I know what you're all thinking. What on earth does Elvis have to do with Home Alone? Like, why am I bringing them both up? What's the connection? Well, over the years, many eagle-eyed viewers have noticed something very interesting in the background in one scene in particular. An extra who looks a little familiar. This guy. Yep, there are some claims out there that Elvis Presley didn't really die and that this background extra is the real Elvis. So in this episode of Weird Tales, we are looking into the urban legend that is the Elvis in Home Alone conspiracy. So it's time to chuck on your blue suede shoes and arm your house with traps as we check it out. So I guess this weird tale starts in 1977, the day that rock and roll died. Or did it? The conspiracy of Elvis being alive didn't start with Home Alone. As a matter of fact, ever since Elvis's death, rumours had pretty much started straight away that Elvis is alive, with many newspapers showing some pretty dodgy photoshopped evidence that the king is still very much alive and among us. The legend has it that Elvis faked his death to go into hiding and to lead a normal life. And in the following years after his death, there were many supposed Elvis sightings. Even David Banner, aka the Incredible Hulk himself, Bill Bixby, got on the case in the early 90s, where he hosted 2 documentaries that explored the possibility of Elvis being alive.
That he still may be alive. Inside these FBI files is dramatic evidence that there was more to Elvis Presley than meets the eye.
One of my favourite theories of Elvis being alive is Orion, an American singer who looked and sang like Elvis but wore a mask. Many people wanted to know, why is this guy wearing a mask? Which led many to believe that Elvis didn't die, he simply became Orion, and he was wearing a mask to hide the fact that he was Elvis, to keep up the illusion of being dead. In fact, people would flock to see Orion, believing him to be the real Elvis, reacting as if they had just seen a miracle, giving them hope that their icon isn't dead after all. Orion even sung a rendition of Queen's Crazy Little Thing Called Love, so yeah, that happened. I even heard some rumours a while back that there were stories that Orion even founded Orion Pictures. However, Orion wasn't Elvis, but a man called James Hughes Bell, and later on in life he opened up his own pawn shop. But sadly, he passed away in 1998 when his shop was being held up, in a robbery gone wrong. I mean, the tale of Orion itself could be its own Weird Tales episode, as it is very fascinating. But for now, let's just look into Home Alone. Home Alone was written by the legendary John Hughes, who previously directed The Breakfast Club and Ferris Bueller's Day Off, and was directed by Chris Columbus, who would go on to direct Mrs. Doubtfire and the first 2 Harry Potter films. The movie turned the then 10-year-old Macaulay Culkin into a star thanks to his portrayal of Kevin McAllister. However, as brilliant and as loved as Home Alone is, there are actually several theories associated with the movie. One of them being that Kevin grows up to be Jigsaw from the Saw movies, as both characters have a love for creating dangerous traps to teach their victims a lesson. Other theories point at Kevin's father, Peter McAllister, as he seems to have so much wealth. He has a large house and can afford to take his family and brother's family on a vacation to Paris, but we never find out what he does for a living and how he's accumulated so much wealth. This has left many to speculate that Peter is a crime lord of some kind, and further explain that he deliberately threw Kevin's airplane ticket away in an attempt to have Kevin killed. Yikes. One of my favourite theories is that Old Man Marley is Kevin all grown up and has travelled back in time to fix his past mistakes, and to save Kevin, aka his younger self. After all, we learn that there are parallels between the characters in the church scene, where we learn that both these characters have issues with troubled family relationships. So the point is, both Elvis and Home Alone are two entities that are shrouded in conspiracy theories, so I guess it makes sense that both theories should cross paths. Which leads us to... It's later on in the film when Kevin's mother, Kate, played by Catherine O'Hara, is at an airport check-in desk at Pennsylvania, desperately trying to get a ticket back to Chicago to see Kevin. Many people have noticed an extra in the background wearing a black turtleneck top and grey jacket, who also has short black hair and a beard. Upon closer inspection, many people were left all shook up and felt that this was Elvis, and that finally there was now concrete evidence that Elvis was alive and well thanks to Home Alone. This started the urban legend that Elvis didn't die, but instead would go on to be an extra on Home Alone and possibly other movies. After all, this guy does look like Elvis. And if Elvis was alive, he would have been 55 at the time that Home Alone was filmed, and yeah, this guy does look like he can pass off as being 55. So could it be true? Was Elvis really alive this whole time? And did he show up in the background of a movie? Well, it's an exciting premise, but sadly it's not true, and here's why. Well, if we were to believe that this extra is in fact Elvis, that wouldn't actually work when you think about it. If Elvis faked his death and wanted to lay low, why on earth would he decide to be an extra in a Hollywood film? That'll blow his cover, and it makes no sense. Even Home Alone's director Chris Columbus chimed in on this and told USA Today, quote, "If Elvis was on the set, I would have known." And yeah, he's absolutely right. If you had Elvis casually walking around a set at a Chicago airport, you would think that people would be going crazy, especially considering he's meant to be dead. When Macaulay Culkin was on the Jimmy Fallon show in 2018, Fallon brought up the Elvis lookalike theory, but Culkin pretty much laughed it off, and that was that.
Totally Elvis, right?
Yeah, man.
I didn't realize Elvis turned into Richard Karn.
So I think we can conclude that this extra wasn't Elvis. But if he wasn't Elvis, who was he? Well, the extra was a man called Gary Richard Grott. His son, Roman, confirmed that this was his father as an extra in Home Alone, and that Gary Richard Grott knew the director Chris Columbus personally and had actually been an extra on a few of his movies. They met one day when Grott was walking alone on the street, where a car pulled over and a haggard-looking man came out and told Grott that he would look great in movies as he had a certain look and that he would love to cast him as an extra. Grott was actually a bit threatened by this strange man as he looked so rough and haggard, and he didn't really understand why he was approaching him and randomly telling him to be an extra in movies, but the man in the car was Chris Columbus. Maybe Columbus also thought that he looked like Elvis, and maybe that's why he cast him. In Home Alone, Grott's job was to look annoyed, as he was playing a passenger who was sick of being held up by Kate McAllister and just wanted to board his plane. But after doing multiple takes, he wasn't even really acting anymore, and Grott actually thought that his scene was going to be cut, so he didn't tell his family about the ordeal. But upon watching Home Alone, he and his family were delighted to see that he was indeed in the movie. And later on, when Grott found out about the Elvis conspiracy, he actually found it to be really amusing, something that gave him and his family a chuckle. However, sadly, Grott himself passed away in 2016, leaving behind one of the most intriguing urban legends in pop culture. The Elvis in the background isn't the only strange and bizarre extra to appear in a movie to cause eyebrows to raise. There was The Three Men and a Baby Ghost, which turned out to be a cardboard cutout of Ted Danson, as mentioned in my first episode of Weird Tales. Then there's the unofficial James Bond movie Never Say Never Again, which starred Sean Connery. In one scene, we see this enthusiastic extra, who really does bear a striking resemblance to future James Bond Timothy Dalton. Many fans felt that this was a cheeky cameo. You see, here's the problem: at that stage, Dalton himself was a huge star, and he wouldn't have just appeared in a movie as an extra. That and the whole wink wink nudge nudge aspect of the cameo wouldn't have worked, as at that stage Dalton hadn't been cast as James Bond yet. His first James Bond movie came out in 1987, and Never Say Never Again came out in 1983. Now admittedly, this extra does look a lot like Dalton down to his hair and the shape of his eyebrows, but it was just someone who looks like him. I think what also makes this extra stand out is the way he sort of steps out and looks at the camera. You're instantly going to look at him. Oh yeah, and then there's the irony that this guy looked like Dalton, and Dalton himself would go on to play Bond, so naturally Bond viewers are going to have that in their mind. Then we get the 2003 comedy Stuck on You, starring Matt Damon. This was actually something that was pointed out to me by viewers after watching my 3 Men and a Baby Ghost Boy episode. It's otherwise just your average comedy, but in one scene, fans have noticed what looks like a face under a bed, and it's really creepy. The footage has been enhanced to reveal that yes indeed, there does actually seem to be a creepy face under the bed, and what's more worrying is that there is no explanation in the movie for this face. After doing some research, what I discovered is that this strange man under the bed was Stuck on You's executive producer, and that he was hiding under the bed to see if the movie's directors, Bobby and Peter Farrelly, would notice him. So in other words, it was a prank. But I'm guessing that they didn't notice, and that the take of the producer under the bed was accidentally used. But either way, it's quite disturbing. Then there's the unfortunate extra at the end of the Michael J. Fox comedy Teen Wolf, who had an unfortunate wardrobe malfunction with their fly being undone. For the longest time, people assumed that this was a man, but the makers of the film have since spoken out about it and said that it wasn't a man, but a woman. But, you know, man, woman, either way, it's an unfortunate situation. And that's not the only ending to a Michael J. Fox movie to have a goof up by an extra. Let's not forget that weird kid who at the end of Back to the Future Part 3 was pointing at his junk and pulling weird faces. Now supposedly he was doing it because he wanted to go to the toilet. But regardless, it's now time to get back to Home Alone and wrap everything up. So rest in peace, Gary Richard Grott. He may have just been a man doing a job, starring as an extra in a movie, but in doing so, he would become a legend. For a brief moment in time, he became Elvis Presley, which is not a bad accomplishment. Anyway, I'm Minty, and the Elvis Presley and Home Alone conspiracy is a weird tale of pop culture.